What do Brazilians think now of their democracy? Well, we'll know on Sunday, when for the first time since corruption scandals brought down politicians from across the spectrum, voters will be picking a new president, all of the lower house of parliament, and 2/3 of the Senate. With the frontrunner, former President Lula Inácio da Silva, barred from running from jail. Will the faithful from his Workers' Party, the PT, turn out in large enough numbers for the man on the left of your screen there, his number 2, Fernando Haddad? Or could it really be the turn of the far right and former military officer Jair Bolsonaro, a populist who espouses shoot first, ask questions later approach to the soaring crime rate in Brazil? The left may claim that under Lula it improved the lot of the favelas, the slums. But with the boom years a distant memory now and corruption rife, evangelicals are gaining ground. Could they tilt towards Bolsonaro and his ultra-conservative stand on social issues? More broadly, who's got the answers to put the powerhouse of South America back on the rails? Today in the France 24 debate, can Brazil turn to the far right? And with us to talk about it, Glauber Cesarini, who teaches sociology at the University of Paris at Villetaneuse. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
You're also a member of Outro Brasil, Other Brazils, which explain is...
It's an NGO who made some translation of alternative press in Brazil to a francophone public.
All right, also joining us from Sao Paulo, Ligia Maro Costa, who teaches law at the Getulio Vargas Foundation. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Joining us from London, Antonio Sampaio, Research Associate at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And here with us as well from our social media team, France 24's Thaïsi Parente. Social media where a lot of the arguments play out in Brazil.
A lot of division there.
And a lot of division there. We'll talk about it in a moment. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Final hours of campaigning in a contest that's seen one frontrunner barred, another stabbed. We're talking about Bolsonaro, who's campaigning from his hospital bed. Yuka Royer has more on the home stretch of this campaign.
Already feeling victorious, gung-ho supporters of Jair Bolsonaro gathered at Copacabana Beach. Some have swung from the left to the far right.
The first time Lula ran, I voted for him because I thought he was going to change things. I regretted it. Brazil cannot become like Venezuela. Bolsonaro is the only candidate we can trust.
With the candidate still recovering from a stab wound he suffered during a rally, his son Flavio, himself running for the Senate, has been the face of the campaign. Despite his minimizing rape, defending gender pay gap and pledging to loosen gun laws, increasing numbers of undecided voters, including women, are turning to the far-right candidate. The latest polls show Bolsonaro keeping his lead over the Workers' Party's Fernando Haddad by 9 percentage points. The leftist candidate had initially avoided direct attacks on the frontrunner, but in a change of strategy, Lula's successor accused Bolsonaro of sending false WhatsApp messages to derail his campaign.
The time has come to defend ourselves in this final stretch. It's very serious what's happening on WhatsApp. Some of them have already been identified as fake news.
Sunday's vote is shaping up to be the most polarized election since Brazil's return to democracy. One of the smaller candidates, centre-left Ciro Gomes, warns the competing policies of the two main rivals are pulling the nation apart.
Brazilian politics are failing miserably, and the leftist camp failed miserably for the past 13, 15 years, though that doesn't mean it didn't do any good.
If no one wins an outright majority, a runoff vote will take place on the 28th of October. Polls place Haddad ahead of Bolsonaro in a potential second round, but a lot can still change.
Yeah, that poll for the second round within the margin of error, so it is a tight race, come what may. Before we turn to the rest of our panel, Thaïsi Parente, this accusation of fake information being disseminated on WhatsApp, how seriously should we take it?
very seriously. This is the election of the fake news, just like in the United States. It's everywhere, and because messages are paid in Brazil, Brazilians turn to the free option, which is WhatsApp. So everyone is in WhatsApp, and it's a very important tool of communication for Brazilians. And all you see, it's currents, it's people sending information without checking them, just the same as on Facebook as well. There's the same problem. So I think we should take that very seriously because it could change results.
Antonio Sampaio, you agree?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of polarization in this election. This is probably one of the key trends shaping people's decisions. And a lot of this polarization plays out in WhatsApp messages with some of the most radical messages against one group or the other, basically the left talking about the right and the right talking about the left, happens in WhatsApp and is shared among a tight group. So they reinforce each other's visions, and therefore the polarization is reinforced.
Ligia Maracosta, that polarization, just how strongly are you feeling it day to day where you are in Sao Paulo?
I would say that the polarization is actually very, very strong. And I would say that is even worse than in 2014 when we had the elections. Because I would say that this year it is quite different because we still have PT, as usually, as we had in 2014, but now we have a different party. We no longer have PSDB as a party opponent to PT. And really, polarization is really getting really difficult. I would say even that I'm losing friends, if I can say like that, which it has never happened until today.
If it's not too indiscreet, why are you losing friends? What's the argument that's going on?
For every single Brazilian today. Because actually, or you are from one side or you are from the other side. If you say I have a different candidate, so you are already an enemy. So I would say that this is the same. It doesn't matter if you are from the right or if you are from the left. So this is what, Brazilians are saying. You have to position in yourself. And that's why many are actually putting many points saying that maybe you are going to have a decision on the first round of the elections, because many people that were going to vote for other candidates are maybe changing their votes and say, let's, conclude this on the first round next Sunday.
So the smaller candidates getting crowded out, which leaves the PT, the Workers' Party of Lula, or Fernando Haddad now, and the far-right candidate, that former army officer, Jair Bolsonaro. Can Bolsonaro be the next president of Brazil? We heard that biker at the beginning of Yuka Roye's report saying, I used to vote for PT and now I'm going to vote for Bolsonaro?
That's one thing that we need to explain, but not now, in the years for come, because we have translate some voters from Lula, the first election in 2002, about this, that vote for him because he will change the country. And now they are voting for Bolsonaro because he said the same thing, I'm going to change the country. So that's one thing that we need to explain, but we cannot explain right now because we need to let the time run. But I don't think, I don't know, it's a hypothesis, but I don't think Bolsonaro gonna win because the problem is not the pull from the second turn. Now we see that there are even
neck and neck. But the problem for the second turn is the rejection rate. And Bolsonaro had a rejection rate about 50% of the total of electoral voters. So, and Haddad have something like 38 to 40%. So, in the second turn is the rejection rate that's going to play. It's not because we cannot ask today. This poll that was put out by Datafolha on Tuesday, it shows how it's been trending between those two candidates. This is, of course, for the first round. This isn't for this survey is not for the second round. Thaisi, I want you to pick up on what Ligia said about how people in Brazil, it's as if the two, Bolsonaro and the PT, are sort of sucking the air from all the other candidates.
Yes, exactly. Actually, it seems sometimes that there's no one there, no one else in the dispute, when actually there's a third candidate that is rising right now, which is Ciro Gomes, that a lot of people are considering voting for because they don't either want to vote for a PT or for Bolsonaro. So people who are really against those two candidates, they're trying to find other solutions, other candidates that would go with what they believe in, and they're thinking about Ciro.
Now, that same poll put his last numbers at 11%, but of course there's still time, right, between now and election day. Voting is mandatory in Brazil. How does that impact an election?
Well, I think a lot of people that are undecided and that are not very political actually end up having to vote without knowing a lot, and that's where fake news and the power of the internet play a role there, because they go with what they see on the web, with what other people are telling them.
Antonio Sampaio, they say that, in elections where voter turnout is low, like in the United States coming up with the midterms, it's those that are most fired up, most interested in politics that actually go down to the polling station. In an election where it's mandatory, is it do moderate voices prevail, or as Thaisi says, are people more swayed by passing arguments?
I think that in any case, even if vote was optional in Brazil, at this point, I think the polarization would remain, because it reflects the social mood. It reflects what people are actually thinking, and it reflects the discussions and even the public protests and movements that have been happening and dominating headlines in the country for the past few years. That was reflected in the impeachment process that brought down President Dilma Rousseff of the Workers' Party, the PT, back in 2016. That itself caused and strengthened and intensified the polarization and this opposition between those who consider the right wing as rising and threatening social progress and lots of things that the left has done, and those that think that the left, which basically means the PT in this occasion, represents the sort of corruption and being weak on the crime fighting front. So I don't think it would influence a lot the optional vote or not. I think the country is polarized, and this is the main problem that we're tackling right now.
Antonio, when you think back to 2014, when Operation Car Wash began, at the time, I remember on this very set, we were talking, people said, yeah, this is a painful moment for Brazil, but it's the sign of a maturing democracy. It's tackling corruption. Do you still see the glass half full 4 years later? Well,
it's a tale of different institutions and different systems in Brazil. So on one hand, technically speaking, the car wash investigation, which has been basically run by the public prosecutor's office alongside the federal police and being judged by the justice system, has been successful in uncovering several corruption investigations. It has relied a lot on the plea bargains, in which one person tells stories or tells what happened about someone else in exchange for a reduction in this person's sentence. There are many opponents of this technique, but it has uncovered scandals that have been, reinforced by press reports and everything. So on one hand, you have the justice system and the public prosecutor's office that have been very vocal about strengthening public management, meaning fighting corruption. On the other hand, you have a huge decline in public trust in the executive office, meaning the president, and in the Congress. So the progress in uncovering corruption has not had the public impact that perhaps it should, because a lot of people have been relying on the so-called fake news to believe what they want, that this corruption or that corruption scandal has been manufactured and those others have not. So the polarization in public debate has sort of degraded some of the benefits of a vibrant and independent justice system.
Yeah, investigative reporting found that there was this one construction company, Odebrecht, which had this systematic method in place for giving bribes to all sides of the political spectrum. And yet, as you just heard from Antonio Sampaio, according to your political persuasion, you don't believe it. You think it's all a plot.
No, it's not all a plot. There's just one thing that I always said, that the judiciary has become a political agent in this field now.
How so?
How so? For instance, when the Supreme Court decided that Lula is not allowed to make an interview because he's in jail and we are too close for the election, so Lula could not give an interview by Folha de São Paulo. That's one thing. When the Judge Moro decided that, okay, somebody who made a testimony against Lula, now it's the time to go and make public this testimony 1 week before the election. So the little elements from the dossier that was built, they start and go out to the public in very specific moments to play in the political arena. So the question is not. I don't believe there is a plot against PT, against Lula, but there are interests in putting some kind of actors in the arena, and others don't.
All right, so justice is not blind, what you're arguing. We'll put it to the rest of the panel when we come back. And again, who's got the solutions now for Brazil? Stay with us. You're watching the France 24. Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, some of the stories we're following for you in the newsroom. A coordinated accusation against Russia. The Netherlands says Moscow tried to hack into the International Chemical Watchdog's headquarters in The Hague. The UK and EU level fresh accusations. The US announcing charges against 7 Russian intelligence agents. U.S. senators view the FBI's report in turns on sexual misconduct allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. Republicans confident that it's devoid of fresh revelations and that Donald Trump's Supreme Court nominee could be confirmed by Saturday. Tensions rise between Saudi Arabia and Turkey after the disappearance of prominent journalist Jamal Khashoggi, missing since his Tuesday visit to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. 6 months behind bars. That's the sentence for the man who slapped a woman in the streets of Paris, a case that sparked outrage in the wake of a new bill that criminalizes harassment and catcalls in public in France. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're counting down to Sunday's uncertain Brazilian election, electing a president, a parliament, 2/3 of the Senate. With us to talk about it, Glauber Cesarino, who teaches sociology at the University of Paris at Villetaneuse. Welcome back as well to Ligia Maura Costa, who joins us from Sao Paulo. She teaches law at FGV Sao Paulo. With us from London, Antonio Sampaio of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and France 24's very own Thaisi Parente. Luigi Mauro Costa, just before the break, Glauber is saying the problem with Operation Car Wash is justice has not been blind, and that is also something that hangs over this election.
I would say that the problem is not that justice has not been blind. I would say that the problem that we have, it is that we still have a privileged court for politics. for politicians to be more precise. So it means that only the Supreme Court or the Superior Court of Justice is actually able to decide against people that politicians that are handling a position in the government. So those that have a position in the government have not yet been prosecuted. So only those that do not have a position in the government that have actually been prosecuted. So that's the reason why I would say that there is, no real justice on this specific case. I would not say that, justice has not been made in Brazil. Also, I would not say that, there is a problem with the plea bargain, because if you take a look on cases that have been decided all over the world against corruption, this is the mechanism that it is the most one used in order to fight against corruption, in view of the fact that corruption, it is against big leaders, big people. So this is the only way to actually get those people on jail. And I'm very happy to see that many in Brazil have been put in jail. It is true that many still have to be put in jail, and I hope that our fight against corruption continue, and these elections are not going to stop that. This is my hope, but I'm not that certain about that.
Yeah, that brings us to the candidates again at hand. We've been talking about the far right's candidate, and he's been making political hay out of a murder rate that's hit a record high in Brazil, nearly 64,000 deaths last year, up 3% over 2016. The outgoing president, Michel Temer, giving the army police powers to deal with that crime wave crisis. Jair Bolsonaro, his plan, well, to relax gun laws. France 24's team in Rio found that in the favelas, the drug cartels these days are still a law unto themselves.
Essa é a nossa deputada 4567, Lica do São Roque.
In this northern suburb of Rio, Lica do São Roque, the Social Democrat candidate, has only a few days left to convince voters. A main theme of her campaign is addressing violence.
Remember that an employee at the town hall was killed last week.
Queimados, population 137,000, is considered the most deadly city in Brazil. The favelas surrounding it are controlled by two drug cartels, the city center by the militia, a mafia of police, firemen, and public employees. So campaigning is a difficult game.
To be able to campaign, you need to ask their permission. And then later, if you win, you become their prisoner. It's not easy. Not to mention vote buying. People have become used to being paid for their votes. It's madness. It's so sad for people who want serious, honest politics.
Vote buying is common in these peripheries, but no one dares discuss it on camera.
It happened to my colleagues, who accepted 20 euros to vote.
Some parties pay what's called an electoral tax to the militia or to gangs, up to 50,000 euros for the right to campaign on their territory without consequences. To defend their interests, the criminal groups even propose their own candidates. Suspected of links with the powerful gang Comando Vermelho, the singer Ticão has just seen his candidacy canceled. To avoid problems during voting, Rio's Secretary of Security has trained more than 300 men.
They have been trained. They know the electoral law, and if someone commits an electoral crime, they will be arrested in public, caught in the act. Forcing someone to vote for a particular candidate is a crime.
From here, the Electoral Task Force will closely monitor the 300 municipalities suspected of influence peddling during this Sunday's elections.
Antonio Sampaio, what do you think of Jair Bolsonaro's answers to that rise in the murder rate?
Well, I think that he certainly pays a lot of attention to that, but his proposals are little more than the same that the police has been doing. So the tough on crime, sort of iron fist approach to, he promised to let the police give more freedom to police officers to shoot while in service. That already happens, especially in areas that are partially or completely controlled by criminal gangs, such as some slums in Rio de Janeiro, some peripheral areas of large cities across Brazil. And I don't see many changes in terms of prevention of violence, which has been something that the expert community has been calling for many years now. So it's a bit worrying that he's only calling for an intensification of techniques that have proven not to tackle the root causes, not to tackle the long-term problems that
could a President Bolsonaro be akin to the Philippines' Rodrigo Duterte, and that is actively encouraging extrajudicial killings?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. Bolsonaro has moderated a lot of his, has brought down the tone of a lot of his ideas and proposals during the campaign. So it is hard to know for sure where he stands. It is certainly going to be a policy that is much more focused on punitive repression of criminals. But the problem in Brazil is that because the justice system, the prosecutor's office, the public investigators, and even the police sometimes cannot operate so well in areas that are controlled by the gangs, they are not as strong as they should be in some areas, it is difficult to know for sure who are the criminals and who are unarmed civilians. So that's why it is important for any candidate to emphasize the need to reinforce on one hand, the institutions that work with the police and work with the armed police, such as the justice system, the investigators, and on the other hand, to focus on socioeconomic development that is at the root of all these problems. And that's something that Bolsonaro is not doing.
Glauber Cesarino, the people in those working class areas, a lot of them say they're fed up with of course, the crime rate. Why is it that two decades after the arrival of, more than 2 decades after democracy really took hold, you've had the boom years of the economy, why is it still that you have these gangs who control entire neighborhoods in major cities?
That is a difficult question, because that is the problem with Bolsonaro proposal, because he addressed a complex and difficult question with the simplest and wrong answer. Just to resume that. But the problem in Brazil that between 1805, the beginning of the redemocratization of Brazil since today, the real structural social problems were not being addressed. Even if between 2000 and 2013-14, we had a boom in the economy, and we had, in a certain degree, social equality in some sense, we do not address the real structural social problem. We see that in the statistic that we have about homicides. 70% of people who had killed were black. And the police killed last year more than 4,000 people, the majority of them being black. And when we walk in the favelas and the peripheral areas in Brazil, they are 60% of the population the black. Even in the poor side of Brazil, we prefer to kill black people than white people. So this kind of problem was never addressed. Since
not addressed by the left, not addressed by the right. And here's this candidate. He's a former army captain. He has nostalgia for the days of the military dictatorship. And people, as you were saying in part one of our discussion, either love him or hate him. I believe there's a hashtag against him. Let me see if I pronounce this right. Elinau.
Yes, that's pretty good.
Yes. Which means?
It means not him. Not at all. There's ele não, ele nunca, him never. So there's a movement that was created by the end of July, mostly women. They're supposed to be apolitical, against misogyny, against racism, against any form of prejudice that is what people believe that he believes, that Bolsonaro preaches. And so there's this movement that rapidly gained more than 2 million people on Facebook, and now it's in more than 3 million. The account was hacked to say, the account is called Women Against Bolsonaro, and the account was hacked to say Women with Bolsonaro. So that was a big problem in Brazil. And they got the account back, and they decided to go to the streets. There was this protest march that happened in many cities in Brazil last weekend, and here abroad as well. There was one in Paris, there was in Germany and the United States. And this is a very important movement that could change things in Brazil right now, because women are taking the lead and saying, not him. His rejection among women is much bigger than his rejection among men.
And yet, there's still, Ligia Mauro Costa, a sizable number of women who are going to vote for Jair Bolsonaro, despite sexist remarks that he's repeatedly made. It's a bit like with Donald Trump in the United States. How do you explain this?
I would say that, it's not only Bolsonaro that had make actually those kind of remarks. If you think about Ciro Gomes, which is the candidate that was mentioned previously in this program, he has also very, very serious remark regarding racism, regarding feminism. But the press only talks about Bolsonaro because, of course, he's the number one in this pool. I would say that, we have a Bolsonaro light, and I would say that maybe what he has said is he's not going to actually do what he's thinking. And talking about the movement, Women Against Bolsonaro, you also have a movement, Women with Bolsonaro. And actually, if you had movements on the streets that were very important against Bolsonaro, you did have 2 days after those movements, a movement to support Bolsonaro, where the number of people was much larger. And also, I think that what is interesting to see, it is on the previous movement, it was not only people that were going to vote for PT that were, in the movement against Bolsonaro, which were all people that were voting for the left, were in this kind of movement. And 2 days later, we had the movement only in favor of Bolsonaro, where there were a larger number of people on those movements.
How do you explain it? How do you explain so many women who want to vote for him?
For Bolsonaro. I think this is, I would say that, economy, they wanted to have an economy that is going to be much better, more liberal, because people understand that, the economy that we had in the last 13 years was not a good choice for the country. Also, he talks about violence, and he says that he's going to fight violence. And I think that, people, it doesn't matter if it's going to be women or men, they prefer to have a candidate that is going to take care of that than thinking about a candidate that makes some racist or feminist comments. Because we had the same thinking about, for example, Ciro Gomes, that has also some comments that are very racist and also very feminist.
Thaïsie Parente, how do you explain
that I have regarding this specific issue.
Thaïsie Parente, how do you explain the fact that there is a sizable minority of women who say they're ready to vote for him?
I would say it's mostly a hate of PT, mostly a vote of protest, than a vote of support for him. And also, like, for example, the Ele Não movement, she was saying that it was bigger protests for him later. On Twitter, at least, between the 12th and the 24th of September, there were 1.4 million mentions of Ele Não on Twitter, and there were only 284,000 of Ele Sim, him, yes.
All right, don't know how scientific those are in any case.
Exactly.
Antonio Sampaio, time is running short, and there's an important element in all of this, which is religion. A growing number of Brazilians are evangelicals. How is that going to influence or impact this election?
I think this plays out much more on the local level than in the federal presidential election, because we have seen plenty of evidence of evangelical pastors and priests preaching about individual candidates for local assemblies, the federal assembly, so congressional elections and individual characters in those elections, rather than the big presidential election. The reason being that several of the parties in Brazil has something around 35 parties represented in Congress. It's a hugely divided, fragmented political system, and evangelicals are a huge percentage of the Brazilian population. It's estimated that about 30% of the Brazilian population follows an evangelical religion or sect. So they are scattered around these parties, so they have not united over one single candidate. The example of that, the evidence of that, is that Marina Silva, who is a centrist candidate, one of the ones that are really low in the polls that we mentioned before, she is evangelical and she's doing very poorly in the polls.
Doing very poorly in the polls, but have those evangelicals flocked to Bolsonaro the way that evangelicals in the U.S. have flocked to Donald Trump?
I believe that the evangelicals, they share many of the socially conservative views that have been associated with the Bolsonaro campaign, and therefore I would strongly think that the evangelicals form a strong section of Bolsonaro voters.
If we believe in the polls, we saw that between the evangelicals, Bolsonaro had really a large spectrum of votes. But there are not the totality of evangelicals to do that. We have the movements from the evangelicals who fought for the state of right in Brazil, for instance, and candidates who are evangelical and say that we believe in a state without religion, but we are evangelical nonetheless. So the movement's a little much more complicated than that, I think. But one thing that is for sure, and that I would like to come back to another point, because I don't believe when we saw the polls, we saw that 2/3 of the voters from Bolsonaro were men. So between his voters, the large majority are men, older, 40, 45, 50 years old, with a revenue, a big revenue, 5 to 10 minimum wage, Brazilian minimum wage, and with university degrees. So it's a very specific demographic from Bolsonaro. I think that was the thing that we were going to play in the second turn, especially. And evangelical or not evangelical, the place of women in his votes, I don't think is going to be a huge weight to him. A big thing to him.
What we do know is it's a polarized campaign. It's going to be a polarized vote, and there will be a second round. We'll be talking about it again then. Glauber says, Rezino, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank as well Luigi Maura Costa for joining us from Sao Paulo, Antonio Sampaio in London, Taizi Parente. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we're joined by James Creedon. How are you?
Good, Francois. How are you?
So, not so bad. Awaiting Sunday's vote.
Indeed. And there's just one angle that I said I'd zero in on because, of course, there are so many different ways of approaching this from the social media perspective. But football, Brazil, of course, a country, a big lover of football, and it is being used by, well, I suppose all of the candidates in some way, shape or form, but in particular by the far-right candidate, Jair Bolsonaro. You can see him here photographed with some footballing stars who have come out on social media over the last number of weeks, and indeed he has been photographed and is making sure that he's photographed in football jerseys of various persuasions, and so certainly the football card is being used in a bid to rally support.
Hang on, does
right.
this work, having a different jersey each day? Aren't you supposed to support just one?
Isn't that an expression, changing your jersey?
I
don't know. And maybe it is in one language or another, but usually not positive connotations as well. But there you go. This is Lucas Moura, and what he's saying here is, how do you want to face off with bandits? He's talking about Bolsonaro, and he's saying he's not promoting violence, he's promoting justice, and that those who do wrong will be brought to justice by the police. Do you have a better solution? So you have prominent footballers coming out and defending what they see as legitimate sort of approaches to facing off with gang violence and whatnot. This is another footballer, Felipe Melo. And Lucas Moura, by the way, played for Paris Saint-Germain. So
Lucas,
French media focusing on him. This was in 20 Minutes here in France, this particular coverage. Felipe Melo dedicated one of his goals recently to the candidate. He plays for Palmeiras. And in this long video here, he said, this goal is for our future President Bolsonaro. So another footballer coming out to support him. Some pointing out that this kind of goes against history in some respects.
Yeah,
because 35 years ago...
We all remember Socrates in the 1986 team. And
right, well, he gathered a team together, right, in order to fight the dictatorship, the military dictatorship at the time. Perhaps you guys are better placed to talk about it than I am. So some people speaking about that historical, I suppose, irony of sorts. One sociologist here was cited by this article in 20 Minutes as well. I think this is the right screenshot here. In any case, it's a Brazilian sociologist, Diego Tonini, saying, look, it shouldn't be surprising that Bolsonaro would have a certain amount of appeal amongst footballers because they identify with this sort of a discourse. It can be quite macho, and it's a virile sort of strain running through it with a verbal kind of violence that might appeal to them. Also the protection of property, and they do tend, at least to elite footballers, to support the idea of their property being protected.
Has Neymar weighed in on this?
I don't. Neymar was supported from Aécio Neves, who the other candidate for 2014. But now I think he keeps silent because in 2014 Aécio Neves was tangled in a lot of corruption case. So now I think Neymar is going to be a little bit in silence about that. But I don't know.
Right. I'm sure there's been a lot more comment on social media than that particular article in the French media zeroed in on, but I suppose it does show the extent to which there is a long history, I suppose, of sport, or football at least, mixing with politics, but not always in the same vein.
Of course, it's Romario that comes to mind, footballer turned senator. And I don't think...
He ran for governor.
No. Yeah. I don't think he's going to be supporting Bolsonaro.
No, but he's running for governor from Rio. If I do not know mistake. But it's important to see, I think so, that a lot of supporters from Corinthians and Palmeiras and all that created a kind of league to say, not him also. So there is a lot of supporters.
So it's not all in one, it's not all going in one direction. And I suppose a lot of footballers as well might not come from elite backgrounds originally and would not like his discourse because for, I suppose, reasons of attachment to perhaps poorer backgrounds as well. So it's not as if elite footballers...
His anti-black statements as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. James Creedon, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate, our coverage of Brazil's election. You can follow it on our website, france24.com.